Welcome to another in the Founders and Settlers series of programs sponsored by the Neenah and Menasha Historical Societies. My name's Jim Taylor. I'm the Executive Director of the Neenah Historical Society. The two historical societies, each separate and unique, cooperate in the production of this series and other events and programs. The current joint sesquicentennial exhibit at the Octagon House in Neenah is an example of this cooperation. Tonight's program is the third in the Founders and Settlers series. Each of the previous presentations, as well as most of the other historical societies' programs, may be found on YouTube. In the previous two episodes in the series, biographical sketches of early residents were employed not only to tell their amazing stories, but to help explain the founding of Neenah and Menasha. Joseph Jourdain, the subject of the first program, was a blacksmith who came during the federal government's failed Winnebago Rapids experiment and stayed to become the first permanent resident of the town of Menasha. The second program explored the purchase of Winnebago Rapids property and its development by the Doty, Reed, and Jones families. Here we find the early disputes that led to the establishment of the rival towns. The featured early settler in that episode was George Manser, a miller who settled south of Neenah in the early 1840s and helped with the transition from the federal experiment to private grist and sawmills. Today's program will offer biographies of two more important early settlers, Amos Page and Reverend O.P. Clinton, both of whom resided in Menasha. As you are probably aware, descendants of the early settlers are proud to share their stories, their families' contributions to the development of the area. Aaron and Nathan Page assisted with the section on their great-grandfather, Amos Page. Before beginning this presentation, are there any Amos Page or O.P. Clinton descendants present? If so, please remain after the event for a group photo. Presenting tonight are Jim and Tom Van Lieshout, descendants of Joseph Jourdain, and Kathy Humsky, Menasha Historical Society Vice President. Here is local historian Tom Van Lieshout to begin the program.
Thank you, Jim. And I'd also like to welcome you to our presentation this evening. It's a pleasure to present this series, The Founders and Settlers of Neenah and Menasha. As Jim mentioned, tonight our focus will be on two of our earliest settlers and how they impacted our world today. Amos Page, a founding force in the establishment of the town of Menasha, and Reverend O.P. Clinton, known as a missionary to the pioneers and other settlers in the area. We will begin tonight's Founders and Settlers Series 3 with Amos Page and his descendants. My brother Jim will begin by discussing three family members' biography. Then I will discuss the land purchased in 1849 and the dairy farm they built that lasted 4 generations. To conclude, Kathy will talk about how the family helped develop and grow the town of Menasha. These are the Page family members we will discuss this evening: Amos Page, son Fred, and grandson Amos. During the presentation, we will refer to the two Amos Pages as Amos Page Sr. and Amos Page Jr. This will help you understand which Amos Page we are discussing, as they were never called Senior and Junior during their lifetime. Also, we will be referring it to the town of Menasha instead of Fox Crossing, as it was the town of Menasha throughout the Page era. Let me introduce my brother Jim to begin the Page family discussion.
Breaking news, October 24th, 2002. The four-generation homestead and dairy farm of a prominent local family is sold and torn down. Originally purchased in 1849, this farmland will become a 16-family subdivision. Another story on that day discusses how the town of Menasha continuing its fabulous growth by developing a subdivision that will include 3 lakefront properties and 13 ranch-style homes, increasing property values. 2 stories, same event, and both are true. The aforementioned land was part of the property purchased by Amos Page Sr. in 1849. He turned it into a dairy farm and continued 4 generations. This parcel, sold after his grandson, Amos Page Jr., passed away in 1999, was the final portion of the original 175-acre family homestead. The family and barn could not be saved, so it fell to the wrecking ball. With the sale of the parcel of land, the town of Menasha gained a 16 single-family subdivision known as Page's Sunset Shores today. It is located north of Forkin Street and west of Taco Street. The parcels include 3 lots on Little Lake Butamore, each with 120-foot footage and 13 additional ranch homes. This was actually the plan of the family. The farm and land served its purpose, and the family saw that it could be put to better use. The Page family was extremely active in the development and expansion of the town of Menasha, and actually had through the years donated and slowly sold portions of the area to grow the town of Menasha. Selling portions of the land happened early throughout the 153 years. In 1877, Amos Sr. sold part of Lot 2, the southern portion of this land, to the Milwaukee Northern Railroad. They bought the right-of-way and laid rails on the portion of that land. Then, on June 4th, 1880, Amos sold even more of Parcel 2 to the Green Bay Diocese for $425. It contained 4.5 acres, one half acre to the east, and 4 acres to the west of the railway. St. Mary's immediately began to utilize this property for funeral rites, reinterring some of the parishioners from the St. Patrick's Cemetery, then known as the Catholic Cemetery. Twice in the mid-1900s, additional land was purchased for the cemetery on the southeast side of the tracks. This cemetery is currently known as one of the only cemeteries in the United States with an operating rail line running through it. Now let's take a look at the dairy farming family, starting with Amos Page Sr., who was born April 7th, 1818 in Bangor, Maine. He was the 4th of 10 children of Dustin and Mary Page. At age 21, Amos started teaching school in the town of Kilmarnock. In 1844, he bought 100 acres of land in Maine for $400. A year later, he bought more land on the Pleasant River. That parcel included 2 sawmills and all machinery. He renamed the business the A.D. Page and Company. In 1848, Amos and brother Christopher left the East Coast to go west to find their riches as 49ers in the California Gold Rush. On their way, the brothers found work in Menasha and built a sawmill by the Menasha Dam. Their sawmill provided logs in the building of the dam, and Amos was the first cutter to sell lumber by the board foot. Previously, they were paid by the day. Amos quickly fell in love with the area and decided to stay. Amos found a parcel of land on the lake being offered for sale on a land grant, highlighted in the map on the right. The land was just north of present-day 9th Street and west of Racine Street. On November 9th, 1849, he paid $535 for 175 acres of woodland. He turned the property into his homestead and a dairy farm that will last 4 generations. And in 1851, now at the age of 33, he saw a young girl of 18 in the general store and asked her to marry him on the spot. The following week, he brought Eliza Adsit to the farm as his wife. Amos and Eliza had 3 children, Mary, Dustin, and Fred. Amos organized neighboring farmers to team up and build their own road system. This allowed them to pass paying taxes on the roads. In 1869, Mr. Page signed a petition to open 9th Street from Taco to Racine Street. As the Fox River Dam project moved forward, lake property owners were seeing some negative effects. Several farmers, including the Pages, were awarded damages due to improvement projects on the Fox and the Wisconsin rivers. Amos was awarded $760, or equivalent today of $40,000. Not only a farmer, Amos got involved in early Menasha politics. Kathy will cover this part of his life later in the presentation. On July 14, 1897, Amos died of complications of stomach cancer. Funeral services were held under the trees in front of his farm. He was laid rest in Oak Hills Cemetery. After Amos Sr. passed, his son Fred took over the farm. Born in 1858 on the family farm, Fred Page was one of the earliest students to attend the newly built Menasha High School. However, he left school before graduating to assist in the family's chores on the farm. In 1878, he helped build an extension on the home and a horse barn. At age 39, however, Fred was stricken with severe rheumatism and could not work on the farm anymore. He hired hands were utilized to help keep the farm running. Then, at age 42, he met and married a woman from Neenah who worked as a seamstress for Fred's mother. Martha and Fred had 7 children, 1 girl, 6 boys, and 1 boy died in infancy. The boys will take over the farming once they became of age. The farm expanded over the years, and by the time his son Amos Jr., who was born in 1904, it had 2 barns, a well-protected barnyard and for cows and sheep for the winter cold, as well as a windmill. Offered several public offices, Fred accepted to be the city's and town's pathmaster. He would take a team of horses with a grader to smooth out the roads. At age 63 in 1922, Fred lost his battle with sarcoma, a form of cancer. Born on the family farm in 1904, Amos Jr. graduated from Menasha High School in 1922. Late in his senior year, his father passed away. Gone is his dream to become an architectural draftsman. He had to help his mother and family on the farm, so he took agricultural courses at the University of Wisconsin in Madison. In 1929, he rented the farm from his mother, and in 1941, he bought it outright. Amos Jr. ran the dairy farm and property on his own at that point going forward, and as none of his siblings were interested at all in farming at all. The farming life is a special profession, requiring independence and a lot of family support. Amos Jr. found a perfect partner to spend his life with. In 1933, Amos married Anita Frances Rotter. Like Amos, Anita came from a large farming family, one of 9 children. Anita grew up on a large dairy and potato farm just outside of Sturgeon Bay. She was a registered nurse. Throughout her life, Anita worked at Theta Clark Hospital and the Page Farm. The Pages adopted 2 boys, Aaron and Nathan. During his lifetime, Amos had 3 careers: a farmer, civil servant, and an owner of a real estate firm. Like his grandfather before him, Amos was a farmer, but also deep into the town of Menasha's politics. Kathy will also cover a portion of his life later in this presentation. A lifelong member of Trinity Lutheran Church, he was president of the congregation and chairman of the building maintenance committee. He would host annual church outings at his farm. Involved with several farming organizations, he was elected president 14 times of the Dairy Herd Improvement Group. In addition, he was a 23-year member of the Menasha Rotary Club and chairman of the Menasha Historical Society. Now that we discussed the individuals that ran the dairy farm, Tom will take over and talk about the land and the farm itself.
First, let's go back to the early 1800s, the area that will become Menasha and Town of Menasha. The Menominee Nation occupied the territory that was covered in a forest of oak, ash, hickory, basswood, elm, and maple trees. This forest contained a large variety of wild animals, including moose, deer, elk, wolves, bear, and large herds of buffalo. In 1831, with the Treaty of Washington, the U.S. government acquired the land from the Menominee. Shortly thereafter, began selling portions to the settlers. One parcel, described as government lots 2, 3, and 4 of Section 10, Town 20, north of Range 17 East, was sold to John Arndt in 1835. John was a key player in the founding of the city of Green Bay. Through foreclosures and unpaid taxes, the land became available in 1849. Amos Sr. found the parcel of land to his liking. Being offered for sale on a land grant, all he had to do was stake a claim on it. He heard another man named Price was interested in the same parcel. So Amos set out at 9 p.m. that same evening to walk to the Green Bay land office. He beat Price to the punch and purchased the parcel on November 9th, 1849. Amos paid $535 for the 175 acres of woodland. Page wanted to farm the land, so 10 acres of trees were sold for $200 to clear an area for the farm and homestead. Working at his sawmill until 1851, Amos built himself a 2-story house with the lumber saved at the mill. That building will remain for 100 years. Then he developed a dairy farm and called it Page's Point. Farming at the turn of the century was tough, manual work, as they did not have all the modern tools we have today. In 1978, at age 75, Amos Page Jr. provided an interview of his life's experiences. The audio that follows is a portion of that interview. Amos explains life on the farm at the turn of the century as a young boy.
The couple had 7 children, of which Amos D. Page was the 3rd child, born June 24th, 1904. In 1905, a new well was drilled, taking place of the old dug well. A windmill was installed, and it supplied water for the livestock in the house.
And where was this area? No, this was right
here.
Right here. Go ahead.
It supplied water for the livestock in the house when the wind blew. A storage tank was installed in the attic of the house, and water was fed by gravity to the kitchen and the new bathroom. I can remember many times when we forgot to shut the windmill down, and the tank ran over, spilling water down in the bathroom, which really made a mess. Later, a gasoline engine supplied the power for pumping water, and we had water even if the wind did not blow. Before the engine was bought, many times we had to pump by hand for the stock when there was no wind. And later we installed electric deep well pump, and we did not have to depend on the wind or being able to get the engine started. Now we have a submersible pump that works very well. Fred A. Page had rheumatism before he was married and therefore could not do any heavy work. He always employed a hired man until his boys were big enough to help out. When I was a boy, we had 8 or 9 milk cows and made butter, which we sold to regular customers. At the first, the milk was set in pans and the cream was skimmed off later. Later, we had a cream separator, and in 1920, we hauled the whole milk to the Gear Dairy in Menasha. Besides the milk cows, we had a carload of steers, which were fed out for about 18 months to 2 years when they were sold. And my dad did that until about 1916.
This picture was taken at a family gathering in 1968. Amos Jr., circled in red, owned the family property and the farmland at this time. Family members stand by a century-old poplar tree planted by Amos Page Sr. When he planted it, a fence was placed around the tree to prevent the sheep from eating the sapling. As inventions were developed in the early 20th century, Fred quickly took advantage to make the farm safer and more efficient. Some of the changes are: in 1916, Fred installed a generator and lights in the barn. He was concerned for the boys' safety with the hay catching fire, as they would bring lanterns into the barn in order to perform their daily duties. 1919 saw the family's first car, a 1916 six-cylinder Chevy that was started with a crank. 1923, the year after Fred passed away, the 2 barns were torn down and replaced with a larger 36 by 100-foot barn with 20 stands for the dairy herd. 9 men from Winneconne built the larger structure for $3,500, utilizing as much of the wood of the old building as they could. Martha cooked 3 meals a day for their services. Through the 1920s, all of the work was done by hand. Hay was cut, chopped, pitched on the wagon, pitched off for feed the animals, and to be stored in the barn. In 1929, the family bought their first steel-wheeled tractor, and then in 1939, a rubber-tired tractor. The horses were sold as there was no need for horsepower in the future. With horses, they could plow an acre of land in a day. Now, with tractors, they could plow that same acre in an hour. The Page land also had a fruit orchard. Apples, plums, and cherries were sold to the public, as were their young saplings. Martha will own the property after Fred passed away, but their son, Amos Jr., will lease and run the farm. In 1949, Amos Jr. will become sole owner of the farm and property. The dairy farm was farmed for 4 generations, from Amos Sr. to his great-grandsons Nathan and Aaron. Both Amos Jr.'s sons began working the farm, but Aaron left to enter the insurance field, and Nathan became a doctor. As a father, Amos was happy for his children, as they had to move on. The 30-acre farm was too small for the current dairy market for them to survive. Amos could not maintain the farm himself, so he closed the farm and sold off the dairy herd in 1959. Times were changing in the dairy industry and in the Page family. Over the decades, the Page family shared their property with the public. Fred and Martha held many reunions and picnics. Amos Jr. and Anita hosted many fishing excursions and fish fries. National Guard Company I utilized Page's Point for training and officers' retreats. Walter Brothers Brewery had annual company picnics at Page's Point. In 1898, leasing a portion of the Page land, the Badger Boat and Fishing Club built a 16 by 24, 1-foot, 1-story clubhouse on the property. The seven-member club hosted weekly fish fries. Amos Jr., a member of the Menasha Historical Society for 40 years, provided space for the Historical Society to store large items in his barn. Deeply involved in his church, Amos Jr. sponsored an annual Trinity Lutheran County Fair in Page's Point barn. He also participated in their show and tells with many Native American artifacts found on the property. One Trinity Lutheran member remembers seeing a lot of arrowheads presented by Mr. Page. Now Kathy will discuss the family involvement in developing and growing the town of Menasha.
The Page family was extremely involved with the formation and development of the town of Menasha. Father and grandson will play unique roles in the town. Let's go back to the 1850s, at a time when the villages of Neenah and Menasha were beginning to develop. Each would later develop into the cities of Neenah and Menasha in the 1870s. While running the farm, Amos Page Sr. became deeply involved in politics and early civic service. He was a key figure in the early development of the city of Menasha. Amos and another farmer, Philip Verbrick, were provided $30 from the village of Menasha for a trip to Madison in order to apply for a charter for the city. Amos became a trustee of the First Ward. However, the bickering between the cities caused friction. This feuding will give birth to the town of Menasha. Amos, Mr. Verbrick, and others originally were working to build the village of Menasha, but got discouraged with the politics and the fighting. The farmers were not pleased to be evicted from the town of Neenah and frustrated by the way their farm properties were being handled by both cities. So they broke out on their own. On April 3rd, 1855, they held a meeting to form the town of Menasha. The first order of business was to develop this preamble and resolution. You can feel the anger and frustration in their words. Therefore, resolved that said order was adopted contrary to law and in opposition to the known wishes of at least 3/4 of the voters of the original town of Neenah and to the wishes of every voter to the proposed town of Menasha. Be it further resolved that in organizing the town of Menasha, we do not admit the legality or the propriety of said act of the Board of Supervisors, but submit to the act for the time being, under protest, relying on legal and proper tribunal to do us justice. Then Philip Verbrick became the town of Menasha's chairman. Amos was elected to the town supervisor position 6 times from 1877 to 1884. Here is what was said in the history of Winnebago County.
The town of Neenah originally included the towns of Menasha, Vinland, and Clayton. After Vinland and Clayton had been set off, and the village of Menasha sprung up around the north outlet of the Fox River in 1848, there was constant friction in the town meetings between the citizens of Winnebago Rapids and the hamlet starting up at Menasha. The contest originally grew out of the need for roads, school money, and a place to hold town meetings. The natural place for the meetings was where it had always been, held at Winnebago Heights, now Neenah, but the village of Menasha desired that half the time it should be held in Neenah. Menasha was at last victorious, and Nina, being dissatisfied, made an application to the county board to divide the town, which was opposed by Menasha, but the town was divided, and the town of Menasha set off from the town of Nina.
80 years later, Amos Jr. will pick up the torch from his grandfather. He went into the civil service with a desire to improve his community. He spent 22 years in the town government, including 16 years as town treasurer and 3 terms as town chairman. In 1959, the year he closed the farm, Amos Jr. was elected town chairman for the first time. When Amos took office as chairman, the town was mostly farmland, with no sewer, no water, no town hall. Raw sewage was actually running through the ditches. Wells were contaminated from malfunctioning septic tanks. After his 3-term, 4 years long, the asset value of the town doubled. A sewage plant was built, sewers were installed, and a town hall was constructed. Plans were also established for a park system, a water system, and street lighting. For his efforts, the town honored him with their, quote, Individual of the Year, unquote, award in 1995. During his tenure as town chairman, Amos Jr. would face many challenges. One was with a familiar theme. The same friction his grandfather witnessed with battling city of Nina and Menasha politics 100 years earlier, Amos Jr. would witness his own. During his administration, the town was constantly under annexation pressures from the cities of Appleton, Nina, and Menasha. Each were picking off sections of the town for their city's use. Through the Page and later the Roland Campo era, the city of Menasha annexed a good share of the town of Menasha east of Little Lake Butimore. On the center map, you can see how annexation affected land originally held as the town of Menasha. Several large tracts were for schools, like Fox Valley Tech, Clovis Grove Elementary School, and Maplewood Middle School, along with businesses such as the Bonta and Kimberly Clark plants. Others were for residential subdivisions. Here is what was said of the annexation issue in the history of the town of Menasha.
It was 1953. The city of Menasha files a petition to annex an area of the town of Menasha. A mere 7 lots were brought in from an area north of 9th Street between London and Grove Streets. The city council also approved the addition of a vacant 21-acre parcel donated by Alva Grove in memory of his mother, Melissa Clovis. That land ultimately became the site of Clovis Grove School. For the next dozen years, Menasha continued to annex town land, while the town's other 2 neighbors, Nina and Appleton, expanded with annexations in different towns. The annexation that created a huge turf war was the 71 Schwarzbauer annexation, which is the present-day area of the UW Fox Valley. This was by far the largest single annexation to date. Annexations came to an end in 1998, with border agreements being forged with the cities of Nina, Menasha, and Appleton.
Recalling what Jim said about the parceling off of the family property, let me give you a little more detail. In 1965, Amos Jr. lost his re-election bid for a 4th term as town chairman to Roland Campo. Amos was actually relieved, as he was ready to move on to his next endeavor, real estate. With the Campo-Page relationship, things began to move forward in the town of Menasha. The 2 men had big plans to work together and grow the town. Amos, now free from the city politics, focused his energies on his real estate business. Many transactions involved the family land. Amos sold off to developers and donated portions of the Page property. Knowing the ins and outs of zoning laws, Amos was able to work with the Campo administration to improve the town and the lives of the citizens. developing subdivisions and offering property to the town for needed projects such as a boat landing and Little Lake Butamore Park, to name a few. Some of the gifts were met with concerns from citizens, like parking around the boat landing. However, Amos was able to smooth over and negotiate concerns at a public meeting. This is why we consider Amos Page a founding force in the town of Menasha. Not only was he a part of the town's establishment, but also of what his descendants did to help the town grow. The family truly loved their community and wanted to be positive contributors to it. What a family legacy! Helping to build the Menasha Dam, running a 4-generation dairy farm, and 100 years of civil service in the town of Menasha. Even though the Pages property is gone and developed into the community, the memory of the Page family lives on today. Remember, the family farm's name was Pages Point. Well, that name and the Page name can be seen all over the town today. Whenever you pass or go through St. Mary's Cemetery, you will be reminded of Amos Page's initial land purchase in 1849. There's great fishing around Pages Point and Little Lake Butamore. Streets and subdivisions named after the Pages have excellent homes on the lakefront. So when you run past the name Page or Pages Point, please pause and salute the family that helped start and develop the community called the Town of Menasha, now known as the Village of Fox Crossing.
Now, let's take a look at another settler, Reverend O.P. Clinton, who was a major religious figure of his time and shaped our current religious communities. We will cover this story in several sections. Jim will begin with a biography, then discuss Clinton's role as a missionary to the pioneers. Kathy will then discuss his years as a chaplain in the Civil War and then explain how his relationship was with the Nina and Menasha's founding fathers. Lastly, I'll discuss OP's endeavors of building schools and running an orchard, finishing with his lasting legacy. Here is Jim to begin the story of Reverend O.P. Clinton.
Orson P. Clinton was born on November 22nd, 1808 in Ferrisburg, Vermont, to Henry and Eleanor Clinton. He was the 9th of 10 children. His father was a farmer and fought in the War of 1812. When he was 7, the family moved to New York. Orson will remain working on the family farm until he was 21 years old, when he began his teaching career. In 1835, he was ordained preacher at the Academy of Potsdam in New York, then assigned pastor at the Congregational Church in Lewis, New York, by the American Home Ministry Society. After a few local assignments, he was appointed the interim missionary for northeastern Wisconsin. O.P. married Carolyn Finch on January 6, 1836. They had 9 children. 3 died before adulthood. The family moved to Waukesha, Wisconsin, where a brother resided. This is where Reverend Clinton's ministry began in the state of Wisconsin. In December of 1845, he visited Winnebago Rapids. He met Harrison Reed and was impressed with the area. In the spring, the family moved into a block home near Riverside Park, lower left. Shortly thereafter, his son A.D. became the first male European descendant born in this territory. Reverend Clinton developed a strong bond with the Doty family. Governor Doty offered the Clintons his home, the old loggery, also known as Doty Cabin. Lower right. It was rent-free while Doty was in Madison. Later, Charles Doty gifted the Clintons a 10-acre plot on the island east of Menasha's current Smith Park. In 1854, he built a log cabin on that land. And later, on the same property, he built a larger home that included a nursery and an apple orchard. At age 54, he volunteered to be the chaplain of the 21st Regiment during the Civil War. The 21st was largely recruited from the mission field. Reverend Clinton knew many of the men in the regiment. He followed his unit through the end of the war, sending reports back to Neenah, Menasha to keep the home front updated on the unit's movements. Where Kathy will now get into more detail of that later on. After the war, OP became a member of the GAR, the Grand Army of the Republic. On June 17, 1890, suffering from Bright's disease, OP Clinton will pass away in Menasha, and he's laid to rest at Oak Hill Cemetery. Now that we know who he is, let me give you a little more detail. Religious leaders in the first half of the 19th century were deeply concerned with the emerging West. Settlers and entrepreneurs were believed to have a preoccupation with personal gain, a focus on worldly goods, and an insincere piety. The Puritan standard of the New England Congregationalism was needed in the Midwest at that time. The organization, the American Home of Missionary Society, was supporting its members to become missionaries in this new frontier. In 1842, Reverend Clinton volunteered to work in the Wisconsin Territory, as mentioned in Waukesha. OP's religion and his principles were very important to him. Yet he was a practical man who understood the needs of the pioneer and adapted with ease to the situation without sacrificing his ideals. After bringing his family to the area, he performed Neenah's first church service in their log house, a block house near Riverside Park. This service consisted of a group of 12 individuals, including Territorial Governor James Doty and Harrison Reed. Later, as families moved to the north side of the river, starting another village, Father Clinton was ready to preach his first sermon in Menasha. That sermon was preached in the only available building, the Knight's Tavern, located on the river's edge in downtown Menasha, behind what is now currently Faith Technologies. The tavern and boarding house's only common room was also the bar room, with shelves filled with whiskey bottles. Clinton told the housekeeper that, quote, he could preach as well in a bar room as well as in a church, and his customers will have to wait for their drink until after the service. He had a history of long sermons, and this one was no different, making the patrons wait a bit for their drinks. You see, OP's father had an issue with the bottle. That fact shaped his view of abstinence. He developed a 4-week cycle to cover his flock, as his ministry duties included 9 communities, from Fond du Lac all the way to New London. Over the years, he traveled 90,000 miles, delivered 4,000 sermons, and founded 21 mission churches in this area. This was accomplished by driving his horse and buggy over the Indian trails and the cruelest of roads. We were fortunate to have Wisconsin's most influential pioneer religious leader in our area. OP's lasting legacy was the establishment of several churches in Neenah, Menasha. As mentioned earlier, Reverend Clinton held services in his block home, officially starting Neenah's Congregational Church in 1847. A year later, some of the congregation voted to split off and became the First Presbyterian Church of Winnebago Rapids. With another split in 1848, the Methodist Church was formed. For the first 15 years, the Methodist Church worshiped in the Yale Building on Wisconsin Avenue while saving money to build a church of their own. In 1864, it became a reality when 54 members with $700 bought the Congregational Church building at the corner of Oak and Doty Street. In 1851, the Menasha members of the Neenah Congregational Church withdrew and started Menasha's first Congregational Church. Reverend Clinton served the congregation, which included 7 men and 11 women. They built a 16 by 36-foot brick church and schoolhouse on Broad and Milwaukee Streets in Menasha, with 1 central aisle and 2 rows of rough boards for seats. The pulpit consisted of 2 upright boards held together by a rough plank nailed across the top. Singers sat in 2 rows, facing each other on either side of the pulpit. The seeds of several Neenah Menasha Congregationalist, Presbyterian, and Methodist churches were planted by the efforts of Reverend Clinton. The Protestant movement worldwide also had a huge effect on the Twin Cities. OP was a devout Protestant and was not supportive of Roman Catholics. And that affected their development actually in the city of Neenah. Menasha's first Catholic church was established in 1857, and by 1888, the city had 3, which all stand today: St. Patrick's, St. Mary's, and St. John's. It would be another 44 years before Neenah would get its first Catholic church, St. Margaret Mary's, that was built in 1932. In the Fond du Lac, Plymouth area, Reverend Clinton held first services in a schoolhouse. The first church was constructed in 1850. OP moved to New London for a short period of time to develop a church there also. The city of Clintonville was settled and named after OP's brother Norman and his wife Lydia. Norman, a carpenter by trade, established a sawmill on a 1,200-acre land that he owned. And in 1857, Norman built a log cabin for a school and the Congregational Church. Reverend O.P. Clinton was the first itinerant minister to preach in that area. Overall, O.P. helped develop 21 churches along this route, including ones in Oshkosh and Hortonville. Now, Kathy will cover another phase of O.P.'s life.
Now I'll talk about his Civil War experience. During the Civil War, Neenah and Menasha sent out their men and boys, joining companies G, K, and I. The Fox cities, with a population of 5,000, sent over 1,000 off to war. Only a little more than a third will return to their homes along the Fox River. On September 4th, 1862, Reverend Clinton enlisted and served as a chaplain for the 21st Wisconsin Infantry Regiment. Unlike many of the chaplains who lasted about a year, Reverend Clinton endured to the end and was mustered out in June of 1865. During the war, the 21st moved through Kentucky, Tennessee, Georgia, the Carolinas, Virginia, and Washington, D.C. The regiment participated in numerous battles, including Perryville, Chickamauga, Lookout Mountain, and Peachtree Creek. It participated in Sherman's March to the Sea, the sieges of Atlanta and Savannah, and the surrender of the Confederate Army. One of 50 chaplains of the 21st, he followed his men, many close friends, through all of the campaigns. A campaign their colonel, Colonel Finch, called, quote, a crooked line of maneuvers from Louisville to Washington, D.C., unquote. This is what the colonel said of Reverend Clinton.
Colonel Fitch, in his Echoes of the Civil War, gave high praise to Father Clinton as he explained that in the Army, preaching was the least of a chaplain's duties. His usefulness lay in such acts as cheering the sick and cheering the downhearted soldiers, visiting hospitals and writing letters home for the disabled, and generally looking after the well-being and moral welfare of the men. Our chaplain, said Fitch, meaning Clinton, was always active and efficient in these lines. His pioneer life in the early days of Wisconsin especially fitted him for these duties.
An honorable and trusted man, Clinton was granted leave during Sherman's march to the sea. Several Neenah and Menasha soldiers asked him to take their pay back home to their parents. He rolled the $27,000 in a blanket and arrived home without incident. He made personal calls to each family to distribute the cash. At the Battle of Perryville, where Reverend Clinton served, he attended the sick, wounded, and dying, and he helped bury some 4,000 soldiers. During Reverend Clinton's tour, he would write articles back to Wisconsin's papers to update on local regiment movements. Many times he spared little detail. Here, in the words of O.P. Clinton, were what our boys were experiencing in 2 of the battles. We wanted you to see and hear what Clinton went through for 4 years.
October 8, 1862, Battle of Perryville. The 21st Wisconsin was formed in line of battle in a cornfield in a valley in the rear of the 24th Illinois, while our batteries were playing over them upon the enemy. This was evidently a blunder, as the corn was so high that our men could not see the enemy until they were within 30 yards of them, rushing upon them like demons. The fire of the 21st told fearfully upon the rebels. Field Hospital, Chattanooga, September 24, 1863. I wrote you from the field 2 miles south of Chattanooga on the 18th. We were hoping our army would be able to fall back to our base on the Tennessee River without a severe contest with the enemy. Hitherto, our success had been brilliant, and not being aware of the extent of the enemy's reinforcements, we had little occasion to anticipate trouble in concentrating at Chattanooga. But as you are already aware, 9 miles from Chattanooga, in the Chickamauga Valley, on the morning of the 19th, we struck the enemy in overwhelming force, and the most desperate battle of the war was fought. From 10 a.m. until after dark, the roar of cannon and musketry was almost incessant, and the men on both sides fell like autumn leaves. Both armies swayed back and forth in alternate charges and repulses, affording but slight opportunity to carry off the wounded without coming between 2 fires or being crushed between powerful charging columns. At nightfall, the enemy held a large portion of the field where the slaughter had been most severe, and we could obtain but comparatively few of our dead.
The enjoyable part of putting this series together was learning how the settlers interacted with the founders. O.P. Clinton had a working relationship with the founders that had a profound impact on the city of Neenah. Without him, the development of our 2 cities would have been much different. In episode 2, we discussed the founding fathers, Harrison Reed and brothers Harvey and Loyal Jones. Harrison Reed originally purchased the land owned by the U.S. government known as Winnebago Rapids. later to become Neenah. Reed was in dire financial help to keep control of Winnebago Rapids land. At the same time, Harvey Jones, financially established entrepreneur, was eager to go west for adventure and investment. Specifically, he was looking for land near water power to develop a community. O.P. Clinton played a major role in bringing these two founders together. He became the agent through which the two Jones would connect with Harrison Reed. It all happened down south in Waukesha. Clinton, preaching at Lake Mills, was an acquaintance of Loyal Jones, who was working as a merchant in Prairieville, now Waukesha. Loyal explained that his brother Harvey was looking to invest in some western land. Clinton, on his visit to the Winnebago Rapids settlement in December 1845, had enjoyed the hospitality of its new owner, Harrison Reed. Clinton knew of Reed's financial problems and thought a deal could be developed. Reverend Clinton carried Reed's proposition to Loyal Jones, along with his description of the property and its benefits. Here is what transpired as described by G.A. Cummins in the History of Neenah.
Stopping with Reed on his first visit to the place, Mr. Clinton was soon made acquainted with the circumstances in which the former was placed, and upon Clinton's informing him of the requests and wishes of Mr. Jones, Reed at once made Mr. Clinton the bearer of a proposition to Jones. The time having nearly expired which had been allowed Mr. Reed to close up his bargain, and he being unable to do so, and not having found anyone to help him, he was exceedingly anxious, the more so, no doubt, as he had converted to his own use much of the personal property, and in consequence of failure to pay for the same, he or his bondsmen would be called upon to make good all which he had used or disposed of. This was the condition of affairs when Mr. Clinton arrived, and Reed proposed that he should return and report to Jones, and to say that if his brother would furnish the purchase money, he would deed to him 1/2 the entire property of Winnebago Rapids, with the exception of the farm then occupied by Reed, and the place now known as the Blair Farm. These two places, with an undivided 1/2 of the balance, Reed wished to keep as an offset to the advantages offered Jones. Mr. Clinton returned to Waukesha and informed Loyal Jones of what he had found, and his description of the property and the advantages offered were such as to induce the latter to inform his brother of it, and urge upon him to secure the trade.
Harvey was favorably impressed with the plan as proposed and asked that Loyal act as an agent and meet with Reed and inspect the property and, quote, secure the best terms, unquote. Next, Reed went to New York to finalize the deal and then to Washington to pay off the debt. Within the next year, O.P. Clinton, Harrison Reed, and the Jones brothers were living in the Winnebago Rapids settlement block houses built by the U.S. government.
What a story, what a life. Orson P. Clinton ministered to many, served in the Civil War, and assisted in the developing of Neenah and Menasha. Through our research, we found that Reverend O.P. Clinton was a typical pioneer. He mended his broken buggy or harness. He paddled the canoe, shot a bear, made soap and sugar, cultivated a garden, and cared for the little ones at home. He had a nursery on his Doty Island property. The Reverend sold plants, grapes, and raspberries in superior condition and cheap, as noted in the advertisement on the left. In 1846, the Congregationalists of Neenah added to a blockhouse, lower left, next to the Clinton blockhouse for a meeting house, school, and church, calling it Clinton's Church. In the upper left, a painting called the Clinton School was the first school on Doty Island. The school was located in what is now the soccer field on Smith Park, across the street from Clinton's home. The Clinton School existed from 1878 to 1894. It was a frame building with red bricks and a bell tower at the front. Mrs. Alden was the first teacher of a class of 11 children. O.P. Clinton's legacy lives on in many congregations that he established. He had a hand in developing the Congregationalist, Presbyterians, Methodist churches of the Fox River Valley. The first Congregational Church of Neenah Menasha, lower left, is one of several local churches that have their origins in what Reverend O.P. Clinton started. The Menasha Church, pictured upper left, is one of the locations of the congregation. On the right, one of Menasha's mini parks, a half-acre park mainly used by the local residents, is named after Reverend Clinton. In the mid-1970s, a discovery on Doty Island surprised many historians. O.P. Clinton was back in the news 80 years after his passing. In 1975, Fred Herziger noticed several areas in his backyard developing severe sinking. Initial digging showed promising results. Fred contacted the UW-Oshkosh Archaeology Department. Taking a year and a half of painstakingly excavating his land, they were excited with their discovery. The Herziger home, 3542 Park Street, Menasha on Doty Island, is a portion of the 10 acres gifted to O.P. Clinton by Charles Doty in 1849. Finding a brick-lined well and a stone-lined basement, they found the actual house O.P. Clinton built on the property. Herziger also discovered a stone path, which may have led to the outhouse behind Clinton's cabin. Found in the dig were medicine bottles, 1880 light bulbs, pieces of china, clay pipe stems, and a sickle. Not all were the Clintons, but some could have been. The backyard dig, however, was filled in, and the old homestead remains underground to this day. Wow, we took you on a long journey tonight. It was a pleasure presenting this third portion of the Founders and Settlers. It is always a thrill to bring Neenah Menasha's history to life for your enjoyment and enlightenment. I would like to personally thank the Page family for their support, pictures, and stories shared, especially brothers Nathan and Aaron. It surely enhanced our presentation. I'd also like to thank the Neenah and Menasha Historical Societies for their sponsorship and support of this series. And finally, thank you for coming tonight. We hope you enjoyed the stories, and remember, we have this presentation on our YouTube series for you to watch again or share with family and friends. Thank you.